Stranded on Scrap World. Zara's eyes snapped open as alarms blared through the cockpit of her small starship. Red warning lights flashed across the console. She grabbed the controls, trying to pull the ship out of its uncontrolled spin, but it was no use. The hull screamed as it tore through the atmosphere of an uncharted planet. Gritting her teeth, Zara hit the distress beacon, unsure if the signal would even escape the interference. She was thrown forward as the ship slammed into the ground, metal shrieking as it crumpled and sheared away. Then darkness took her. Hours later, Zara swam up from unconsciousness, her head throbbing. Purple blood ran down her face from a gash on her forehead. Pushing twisted shards of metal out of the way, she crawled out of the ruined cockpit and collapsed onto the harsh yellow earth. The alien sun was setting, washing the grim landscape in crimson. Zara stared out at a horizon of endless scrap piles and jagged metal monoliths. Wrecked ships and massive glinting fragments stretched as far as the eye could see. She knew this place from whispers back home, Scrap World, the galaxy's dumping ground, a no-man's land home only to scavenging crews, bandits, and outcasts. And now her prison. A wave of despair flooded through Zara. The distress beacon was likely smashed. Her ship was destroyed. Her comms couldn't catch even a whisper of a signal. She was utterly alone. Alone and injured on a world more keen on devouring her than helping her. She shivered despite the lingering heat. Her Keelarian body was built for the misty forests of her homeworld, not this irradiated junkyard. Her lavender skin began to sting in the dusty, unfiltered air. But she was a daughter of Keelar. Her people did not surrender to despair or adversity. Pulling herself up, Zara limped back to the wreckage. She needed water, shelter, a way to signal for help that could be seen from orbit. And she needed to scavenge what parts she could to build it. Most of her supplies had survived in their impact crates. Zara loaded up a pack with water rations, tools, her survival kit. Night was falling and she didn't dare stay out in the open in the dark. Picking a direction at random, she started hiking into the scraplands. The scrap piles towered over her, jagged and mountainous. The dying sun glinted off sharp metal edges. In the distance, an unearthly howl echoed through the junkyard canyons, raising the hairs on the back of Zara's neck. She walked for hours, scanning for any sign of life or inhabited structures. But there was only the graveyard of rusting ships and skeletons of long-abandoned machinery. As true night fell, a vicious wind picked up, whipping stinging grit against her face and skin. She stumbled over unseen debris, barely catching herself from falling onto rusted shards. In the darkness, the howls grew louder, closer, accompanied by scrabbling and scraping. Zara's heart pounded as she realized she was being stalked by some of Scrapworld's nocturnal predators. She couldn't see them, but she could hear their hungry pants and snarls as they closed in. Exhausted, disoriented, terrified, she ran, praying to find some shelter before the beasts reached her. Ahead, she spotted an angular dark shape, some kind of small structure built against the side of a mountainous scrap pile. A hideout or abandoned shelter. It was her only chance. Zara sprinted for it, her breath ragged in her chest, her lungs searing from the toxic dust. The shrieks and howls grew closer, so close that Zara was sure she felt putrid breath on her neck, sure that the next instant vicious fangs would rip through her. A blinding light cut the darkness, accompanied by a deafening crack of sound. The predators screamed and scattered as more blasts lit up the night. The door of the shelter banged open and a hulking figure stood outlined by inner light, a massive gun in his hands. He swept the light across the fleeing shapes, then fixed it on Zara. "Get in here if you want to live," he growled. She stumbled into the shelter and the man slammed the door shut, throwing multiple locks. In the sudden light and silence, Zara found herself face to face with her rescuer. He was human, a heavily scarred and weathered face glaring out from beneath a wild thatch of dark hair threaded with silver. His huge frame was wrapped in a mix of armored plating and tight sealskins. Black eyes gazed at Zara with a combination of suspicion and curiosity. Thank you, Zara managed, her translator rendering her words into standard interlingua. I'm Zara, a Keelarian engineer. My ship crashed and I dash. The man cut her off with a brusque wave. Name's RYKK. And this is Scrap World, girl. Only two types end up here, scavengers and corpses. So which are you? Neither, Zara said, lifting her chin. I'm a survivor. And I need your help. RYKK snorted, but Zara saw a flicker of something that might have been respect cross his grizzled face. He lowered his gun. We'll see about that, he said. But for now, welcome to the Scraplands. Surviving the Scraplands. The inside of RYKK's shelter was a cluttered den filled with scavenged equipment, stacked salvage, scattered weapons and tools. He cleared off a bench and tossed Zara a pack of Medigel. Patch yourself up, he said gruffly. Then we'll talk about this help you need. Zara applied the gel to her wounds, feeling instant relief as the numbing regenerative took hold. RYKK watched her closely. Your ship's scrap now, he said. Scavs will pick it clean by daybreak. Probably already started. Zara's heart sank but she pushed away despair. I can build a distress beacon with some parts and equipment. I need to signal my people to rescue me. RYKK leaned back, folding his arms across his broad chest. No free rides on Scrap World, girl. I stick my neck out for you, I expect you to pull your weight. Zara met his hard gaze. I'm an engineer. I can fix things, build things. Make myself useful. A glimmer of a smile tugged RYKK's mouth. We'll see. Get some rest. Dawn comes early and the Scraplands ain't kind to stragglers. Zara curled up on a pallet in the corner, her exhausted body pulling her into fitful sleep filled with metal teeth and monsters. Dawn saw them trekking deep into the Scraplands, RYKK ranging ahead, his huge rifle loosely cradled in his arms. Zara followed, a salvaged plasma cutter hanging from her belt, an empty pack on her back to hold scavenged parts. The sun beat down mercilessly, glinting off endless jagged metal. The air shimmered with toxic heat. Sweat soaked Zara's skin but she pushed forward determinedly, scanning for usable components. At midday they took shelter in the shadow of a colossal wrecked freighter to eat a meager meal of Nutribars and tepid water. RYKK pulled out a battered scanner and started sweeping the area. What are you looking for? Zara asked. Rare earths, vanadium cores, quantum conductors, RYKK said. Valuable salvage. Might be some in a ship this big. I need a hypercomms array, Zara said. And a Lutrium power cell. RYKK squinted at her. Tall order. Might take some time to find. I can boost your scanner, Zara offered, holding out a hand. Let me. RYKK hesitated then handed it over. Zara pried open the back and studied the wiring, her quick mind already racing with modifications. Hold this, she said absently, handing RYKK components as she worked. In minutes she had tripled the scanner's range and sensitivity. RYKK took it back, eyebrows raised as he studied the improved find. Not bad, he allowed. Guess we'll see what we see. They salvaged until nightfall, Zara's pack growing heavier with components. She was filthy, drenched in sweat, her lavender skin reddened by the brutal sun. But she had made progress. As they trekked back to the shelter through the deadly dusk, a swarm of bat-like creatures swooped out of the sky, diving at them with razor talons. RYKK unslung his rifle with the smooth speed of old instinct, picking the creatures off with precise shots, but more kept coming. Zara unhooked the plasma cutter from her belt and triggered the ignition, sweeping the brilliant blue beam at the creatures. Screeching, they veered away, fleeing the searing plasma. RYKK shot her an approving look as the swarm retreated. Quick thinking, he said. Plasma's good for more than cutting, eh? Back in the shelter, Zara laid out her haul, sorting components as RYKK watched. This is a good start, she said. I can begin assembly tomorrow. Seems like you've already begun, RYKK said, nodding to the modifications she'd made to the shelter's air and water filtration units. Zara had patched together the aging equipment, boosting efficiency by 30%. Zara shrugged. I like fixing things. It's what I do. RYKK studied her, his dark eyes intent. Why were you out here alone? Long way from Keelar space. Zara looked away. I was scouting new terraforming sites. My team and I got separated in the Aaronic Nebula. I tried to reach the rendezvous but hit a mag storm. She trailed off, throat tightening. Her team, her friends, lost in the void. Were they searching for her? Mourning her? RYKK grunted, looking away. Lot of ships lost to the void, he said roughly. Lot of folk stranded on this ball of rust. You ain't special there. I know, Zara said softly. But I have to try. I have to get home. RYKK was silent for a long moment, then nodded once. Get some sleep, he said. Another long day tomorrow. Curling up on her pallet, Zara closed her eyes against the threatening tears. Space was a cruel mistress, cold and merciless. But she would not surrender to it. She would survive this. Fixed in that determination, she slipped into exhausted sleep. Haven in the wasteland. Days turned into weeks as Zara and RYKK scoured the scraplands for the components she needed. The work was grueling, the sun punishing, the nights haunted by the shrieks of predators. But day by day, piece by piece, Zara assembled her distress beacon. As they worked, RYKK taught her the ways of Scrapworld, how to find the purest water seeps, which scrap piles were most likely to contain valuable tech, which fauna to avoid. In turn, Zara used her skills to improve RYKK's shelter and gear, reinforcing the walls, boosting power efficiency, upgrading his weapons. They fell into a rhythm, an unspoken partnership born of necessity and slowly growing respect. RYKK was a man of few words, his past a closed book, but Zara sensed depths beneath his gruff exterior. One evening, as toxic winds howled outside the shelter, Zara looked up from where she was soldering connectors to find RYKK watching her. His dark eyes held an unfamiliar softness. You're something else, he said quietly. Never seen anyone with a mind like yours. Hands like yours. Zara felt a flush rise to her cheeks. I just like the work, she said. RYKK nodded slowly. Lot to like in work like that. Building something. Fixing something. Makes you feel like maybe that the verse ain't all entropy and chaos. Zara set down her tools, meeting his gaze. Is that why you stayed here? To build something? RYKK looked away, jaw tight. For a long moment Zara thought he wouldn't answer. Then. Stayed because there's nowhere else, he said roughly. Fought in the border world wars. Did things, saw things, after that, well. Only place for something like me is a place like this. Zara's heart clenched. The border world wars had been a meat grinder, leaving scars on every world and soul they'd touched. Hesitantly, she reached out, laying a hand on RYKK's arm. You're not a thing, she said softly. And you're not alone. Not anymore. RYKK stared at her hand on his arm, then slowly, carefully covered it with his own. His skin was rough, scorched by sun and work, but his touch was gentle. They sat like that for a long time, listening to the storm rage outside their small haven, taking comfort in the simple contact. Something fragile and new taking root amidst the harsh metal wasteland. The next day saw an ion storm descend on the scraplands, the sky filling with crackling purple lightning. They were forced to take shelter for the duration, huddling in the dim light of backup power cells. RYKK used the downtime to disassemble and clean his weapons while Zara picked through the last of the scavenged components, putting finishing touches on the beacon. "I think it's done," she said wonderingly, turning the device over in her hands. "If I can get it high enough, boost the signal, this could reach the relay in the Aaronic Nebula." RYKK looked up, something unreadable in his eyes. "Then what?" Zara blinked. Then my people will come for me. I'll go home." Home. It seemed like a distant dream after the eternity on Scrap World. Her clean, ordered life as an engineer, the misty forests of Keel Ar, her family, all so far away. And what of RYKK? The thought of leaving him tightened her chest. He'd saved her, in more ways than one. The idea of returning to her old life, leaving him behind on this hellish junkyard. RYKK was watching her, a sad smile tugging his mouth. "Never easy, is it?" he said softly. "Leavin' something behind. Even if it's a slag heap like Scrap World." Zara stared at the beacon, blinking back sudden tears. "Come with me," she blurted. RYKK went very still. "What?" "Come with me," Zara repeated, the rightness of it settling in her bones. "To Keel Ar. You don't have to stay here. You could, we could." She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. RYKK was staring at her, shock and something painfully like hope warring on his face. "I'm no Keelarian," he said roughly. "Can't build pretty things like you. Can't fix what's broken in me." Zara set aside the beacon and crossed to him, taking his face in her hands. "You built me a haven," she said fiercely. "And you're not broken. Just a little dinged up. Like everything else on this rock." Slowly, hesitantly, RYKK reached up to cup her cheek, his thumb smoothing away her tears. "You sure about this?" he asked hoarsely. "Saddling yourself with an old scrap hound like me?" In answer, Zara leaned in and kissed him, pouring all her fear and hope and longing into the touch. After a shocked heartbeat, RYKK wrapped her in his arms and kissed her back, fierce and desperate and aching. The storm raged on outside, but in that moment, in that kiss, they made their own shelter, their own haven. The broken soldier and the stranded engineer, finding home in each other amidst the wasteland. Beacons and bandits. The ion storm finally blew itself out after 3 days, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Zara and RYKK emerged from the shelter, blinking in the harsh light. The scrap piles glinted under a metallic sky, the air heavy with lingering charge. Zara clutched her beacon, nerves thrilling through her. This was it. Her chance to reach out, to call for help. But she was suddenly, painfully aware that it could also mean saying goodbye to RYKK. As if sensing her thoughts, RYKK squeezed her shoulder gently. "Need to get that thing up high," he said gruffly. "Boost the signal. I know a place nearby, an old comm tower. Might do the trick." Zara nodded, throat tight. They gathered supplies and headed out into the scraplands, picking their way carefully through the unstable debris. The landscape seemed even more ominous than usual, the silence broken only by distant creaks and groans of settling metal. The comm tower rose from the center of a vast scrap plain, a skeletal spire of girders and antennae. RYKK led them to its base, where a rusting ladder led up into the dizzy heights. "I'll go up," Zara said firmly, clipping the beacon to her belt. "You keep watch down here." RYKK frowned but didn't argue, his eyes dark with worry. Zara started up the ladder, hand over hand, trying not to think about the drop yawning beneath her. The climb seemed to take hours, the wind tearing at her, the metal shaking under her hands. But finally she reached the top, a small platform just big enough to stand on. Vertigo swam through her as she looked out over the vast expanse of Scrap World, the horizon a jagged line of metal teeth. With shaking hands, Zara unclipped the beacon and mounted it on the tower's peak, aiming its transmitter at the sky. She took a deep breath and flipped the activation switch. The beacon thrummed to life, indicators blinking green as it began broadcasting its distress signal into the void. Zara nearly wept with relief. And then she heard the gunshots. Heart in her throat, Zara leaned over the edge of the platform. Down below, RYKK crouched behind a low wall, his rifle in his hands. Arrayed against him was a horde of ragged figures firing a motley assortment of weapons, raider bandits, drawn by the beacon's activation. Zara swore under her breath. The beacon was a blazing target now, and she was trapped up here, helpless. She could only watch as RYKK returned fire, his shots precise and deadly, felling bandit after bandit. But there were so many, and they were closing in. Suddenly, an enormous bandit wielding a crackling plasma axe charged RYKK's position, bellowing with rage. RYKK pivoted and fired, but the shot glanced off the raider's shoulder armor. The bandit's axe swung down. And Zara, without thinking, leaped from the platform, a scream tearing from her throat. She fell like a thunderbolt, slamming into the bandit just as his axe fell. The impact sent them both tumbling, the breath blasted from Zara's lungs. Dazed, wrenched with pain, Zara rolled to her feet, snatching up the dropped plasma axe. The bandit leader roared and charged her, murder in his eyes. Zara met his charge, axe flaring. She was an engineer, not a warrior, but in that moment she fought with the ferocity of a mother keel AAR defending her den. The axe felt alive in her hands, an extension of her will, her determination to protect the man she'd come to love. They traded blows in a whirlwind of plasma, sparks showering the sand. Zara swore she felt the crackle of ions in her teeth, the smell of ozone sharp in her nose. The bandit was strong, driven by rage and madness, but Zara was quicker, driven by love and desperate need. She slipped under his guard, the axe flaring as she buried it in his chest. The bandit's eyes went wide with shock, his mouth opening in a soundless cry. Then he fell, his smoking bulk crashing to the ground. Silence fell like a thunderclap. Zara stood over the body, chest heaving, the axe heavy in her hands. Then RYKK was there, pulling her into his arms, his face white with fear. "You're crazy," he rasped, running frantic hands over her, checking for injuries. "Crazy brilliant and crazy brave, but space, woman, don't ever do that again." Zara laughed shakily, the adrenaline draining out of her, leaving only exhaustion and relief. "I couldn't let you have all the fun," she quipped weakly. RYKK crushed her to him, burying his face in her hair. "I can't lose you," he whispered brokenly. "Not now. Not ever." Above them, the beacon pulsed its distress call into the sky, a promise and a plea. They clung to each other amidst the ruin of the battle, two hearts beating as one, waiting for rescue or whatever else the cruel verse saw fit to send them. But they would face it as they had everything else, together. Rescue and farewells. They waited by the beacon for 3 days. 3 days of watching the skies, of jumping at every noise, of patching each other's wounds and holding each other through the long, cold nights. On the morning of the 4th day, a ship appeared in the sky, a sleek Keelarian courier vessel shimmering with pearlescent hull plating. Zara wept at the sight, relief and homesickness and bittersweet joy all tangled together in her chest. The ship set down in a swirl of dust and a Keelarian in the green robes of a ranger stepped out, her lavender face creased with worry and relief. "Zara Kylen," she called out. "By the stars, we thought you lost." Zara ran to her, embracing her fiercely. "Aisha," she gasped out. "I never thought I'd see you again." Aisha held her tight, tears streaking her face. "When we lost contact, and then we picked up your beacon, oh, Zara, what happened?" Over Aisha's shoulder, Zara saw RYKK hanging back, his face an unreadable mask. Her heart twisted. She turned back to Aisha, wiping her eyes. "My ship crashed. I've been stranded here. RYKK saved me. In more ways than one." Aisha looked past her, taking in Rykk's battered form, the scars and hard edges that spoke of a lifetime of struggle. Something softened in her face. "Then we owe him a great debt," she said formally. "Rykk of Scrap World, the Keelarian people are in your debt. If there is anything we can do." Rykk shook his head, a sad smile playing about his mouth. "Just take care of her," he said roughly. "Get her home safe." Zara's heart seized. She pulled away from Aisha and ran to him, grabbing his hands. "Come with me," she pleaded, as she had in the shelter. "Please, Rykk. Don't stay here." Rykk cupped her face, his calloused thumb stroking her cheek. "Ah, Stardust," he sighed, using the nickname he'd given her. "You know I can't. Your world, it's not for me. I'm too rough, too broken. I'd never fit." "But I love you," Zara whispered, the truth of it breaking her heart. "I don't want to leave you." Rykk's eyes glistened. "And I love you. More than anything in this rusted verse. But that's why I gotta let you go. You deserve so much more than this place. Than me." Zara shook her head fiercely, tears blurring her vision. "You're wrong," she said. "You're the best man I've ever known. The only man I'll ever love like this." She kissed him, pouring all her love, all her grief into it. Rykk's arms came around her, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the galaxy. A discreet cough broke them apart. Aisha stood there, empathy on her face. "Zara, we must go. The ion storms are building again." Zara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She stepped back from Rykk, memorizing every line of his face, every scar and weathered crease. Then, in a cracked whisper, "Goodbye, my heart." She turned away, every step a knife in her soul. She was halfway to the ship when Rykk's voice rang out. "Wait." Zara spun, hardly daring to hope. Rykk was striding toward her, a fierce light in his eyes. He reached her, grabbed her hands. "I'm a fool," he said roughly. "A damned fool to think I could watch you fly away and survive it. You're in my blood, woman. In my bones. Where you go, I go. If you'll still have me." Joy, bright and fierce, burst through Zara's chest. "Forever," she vowed. "Forever and always." Hand in hand, they walked to the ship, leaving the cruel wasteland of Scrap World behind. The future stretched ahead, unknown and uncertain. But they would face it as they had faced everything else, together. The scavenger and the engineer, two halves of a whole, bound by a love that had taken root in the harshest of soils and flowered in defiance of all odds. As the ship lifted into the sky, Rykk turned to Zara, wonder in his eyes. "You really want to saddle yourself with a scraped-up old soldier?" Zara kissed him, a smile curving her lips. "Always," she whispered against his mouth. "For all the journeys to come." And with Scrap World shrinking beneath them and the stars spreading out ahead, they flew on into their future, ready for whatever adventures and challenges it held. Together, they could build anything, fix anything, survive anything. For in the end, the greatest haven they'd found was in each other, an unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of the wasteland, a love that would weather any storm the galaxy could throw at them. And that was the greatest treasure of all. The end.